You were sitting in a coffee shop on a Monday morning at 8 a.m. about to go to work. You saw 20 people running down the street saying, they've got guns, they're killing everyone, run, get out of here, help. You would get up and you would look down the street and you'd go for shelter because it's the knowledge of the crowd. Just like if you've got a bunch of deer out at a watering hole and one's drinking, the others are looking, and one sees a mountain lion about 20 yards away in the tall grass. That deer runs. The others know it wouldn't be running if there wasn't some reason. So it bolts. All our instincts are like that.
Now look what's happened. Global pandemic, panic buying across the world, entire countries quarantined. Thanks, open borders. On the one hand, you have Italy, controlled by an open borders left-wing government, over 10,000 coronavirus cases, over 800 deaths, and a vector for the virus spreading across the entire continent of Europe. Then on the other hand, you have Russia, which closed its entire 2,600-mile border back in January. Just 20 coronavirus cases, most of which were Russians returning from Italy. Most of the victims have already recovered. 0 deaths. No pandemic in Russia. Strong border controls. Minimal coronavirus cases. Seems like there's some kind of connection here.
Disturbing stories from Italy where virtually the entire nation is on lockdown. Just grocery stores and pharmacies are open to the public. Streets are relatively empty. And then there's this case, a woman under quarantine in the northwest of the country who's locked in her home with her husband who has died. Locals say she's shouting from her balcony for help. Her husband apparently died early in the morning Monday. The man had tested positive for coronavirus and his body has been left in the apartment reportedly until it can be removed 48 hours after his death.
Thanks for joining us for CBN Newswatch. I'm Wendy Griffith. A top U.S. health official tells lawmakers today that the worst is yet to come with a coronavirus outbreak and that the virus is, quote, 10 times more lethal than the flu. The White House continues to make battling the spread of the disease a top priority. And the administration also hopes to inoculate the economy.
Topic number 5, of course, COVID-19. As of this recording, we're now over 120,000 confirmed cases worldwide, over 1,000 cases here now in the United States. Big jumps in the number of reported cases overnight in Iran, 958 new cases. That's about a 10% jump. That country now 9,000 reported cases. Italy is reporting more than 10,000 cases. In Korea, South Korea, 7,700 cases. Spain had a 25% jump since yesterday, now more than 2,000 cases reported there. Vice President Mike Pence, who's the administration's point man on the coronavirus response, had a press conference yesterday afternoon. Didn't reveal any specifics about President Trump's economic plan for addressing the virus, but did promise that local and medium-sized businesses would be able to give workers paid leave to ensure that sick people don't come to work, which is really important when you're trying to contain the spread of a disease.
That's why crows always fly in pairs, because they're while one's eating and doing something or drinking, the other's watching. And they fly in larger groups, always in pairs, because hawks and owls kill them. And so you'll see a crow fly down to drink, but always sitting on a tree. Another one lands, and then he flies down and drinks, the other one flies back up, the other flies down and drinks. And if you get up while you're fishing from your chair, even 50 yards away, 100 yards away, 200 yards away to go get another beer or whatever out of your cooler, caw, 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 and the other one flies and goes in a circle, and then they have a discussion. That's our instincts. That's how we're designed.
Our next guest knows a thing or two about quarantine regulations here in the U.S. Former Deputy Assistant Attorney General John Yoo joins us live. John, good to have you back with us.
Hi, Shannon.
Okay, so let's start with schools, because there are people saying, I know you're a professor and you had to teach class online today, and people have had very different reactions about this. We want to put up the list of colleges and universities, and this is just sort of a list that continues to grow, but this is what we have so far of the schools who say, we're going to go to online classes for as long as we can. What do you make of that? Because we're told right now the social distancing, keeping people away from each other, is the one thing that may not stop the spread, but it may flatten it in a way that we don't have a huge spike that overwhelms our hospitals and they can't handle it.
Well, first thing we should ask is whether students are really in the population age range where we should be worried about. Doesn't seem to me that's the case. We really should be worried about the elderly, people with health conditions. Basically, college students are in pretty good shape and they're young. I can see why people might worry that they'll spread the disease to other people, maybe outside the university. But we should also be conscious of the costs we're imposing when we shut down universities. Classes aren't getting taught. As you said, I just taught my first internet class yesterday and today using Zoom. It really wasn't the same. Maybe you could give a lecture, but it's very hard to ask students questions. It's very hard for them to see us. Maybe they don't like the look of us anyway, but now we're at much farther distance from each other than we ever used to be. I think it's hard to have a discussion to really learn on the internet still.
Same story in other countries which closed their borders early, like Mongolia, which has recorded just a single case. Singapore, which like Russia closed its border to all Chinese travellers back in January, has now passed the peak of coronavirus infections and has virtually defeated its spread. Meanwhile, even as Italy was desperately preparing to lock down its entire country, EU officials were steadfast in their insistence that no border controls would be imposed, because maintaining the sacred flow of international traffic is always going to be more important than stopping a global pandemic. There are still people arriving at major UK and other European airports from Italy who aren't even being screened for coronavirus.
So I've just arrived back, having spent 4 days in Milan, just picked up my bags at Heathrow, and straight through. No checks from medical staff, no temperature checks, no thermal checks.
Also, that insurance companies had agreed to shoulder all coronavirus costs for those they cover, including Medicare and Medicaid plans, including eliminated any co-pays on coronavirus testing. The administration is still sticking with payroll tax relief as a centerpiece of its economic relief plan. Pence said the administration wants to make sure that hourly workers who may not have family leave today would be able to afford the resources they need to keep their families, to provide for their families, so they don't feel compelled to go into work when they're not feeling well. That may not have the support it needs to get through Congress. Vice President and the President's economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, said they're working with Democrats in Congress, talking about how to get the plan through. The market didn't really care for that news, and I'll talk about that in just a moment.
Dale Hurd has the latest.
With the number of cases of coronavirus in the U.S. now more than 1,000, government officials, businesses, schools, and even political candidates are taking drastic measures to contain the virus. Some universities are going to online classes, and airlines are reducing domestic flights. On the campaign trail, Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden both canceled rallies. And New Rochelle, New York has been declared America's first containment zone.
It is a dramatic action. This is literally a matter of life and death.
The containment zone is a 1-mile radius around the Young Israel Synagogue, where dozens of people were exposed by a sick attorney. Dr. Anthony Fauci at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases warned the rest of the nation to take precautions.
Okay, so let's talk about this idea of quarantine. I mean, we have right now a containment zone in one area just outside New York City. But this idea of quarantines, it seems like we continue to hear stories every day of people who are, quote unquote, breaking them. They're going to the store, they're going to their kids' schools, they're doing what they want to do. I mean, Americans, I think that they're going to have a hard time responding to some of this stuff, but it may be necessary. What can you tell us about how it would work?
Yeah, and this comes from my time in the government after 9/11 when we were worried about a bioterror attack. The people should realize that the federal government really only has control over the international borders and the borders between states. The federal government doesn't have the money and personnel to really carry out a quarantine within a state. Take California or New York. That's got to be done under our Constitution by the state governments. They're going to see a real test of different states and how capable they are and how effective they were in planning for an event like this. So you couldn't have one national solution like you saw in China or what you're seeing maybe in Italy. You're going to see lots of different states doing different things, but they're the ones who have to take on the front lines of a quarantine and fight this pandemic.
Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this isn't a big deal, and the people who say it's just the flu are obviously downplaying the severity of the true threat. So as the 24-hour media news cycle breathlessly reports every new coronavirus death toll, it's interesting to consider what we're indoctrinated to care about and what we choose to ignore. 100 Americans die in car crashes every single day. and no one really cares. 128 Americans die of opioid drug overdoses every single day, and no one really cares. Around 50,000 Americans die from the flu every single year, and no one really cares. Globally, the flu kills 290,000 to 650,000 people every single year, and no one really cares. Is coronavirus impossible to defeat? If you look at the numbers out of Singapore, South Korea, and even China, the figures suggest it can be controlled. South Korea's health minister says they've, quote, already passed the peak of coronavirus infections. The number of new infections in South Korea has dropped every day for the past 3 days. Similar story in Singapore, which again closed its border back in January. And China just closed the last of its 16 makeshift hospitals that were built in Wuhan. China reported just 17 new cases of coronavirus in Wuhan, the lowest figure since published records began. Alfred Wu, Associate Professor at the National University of Singapore's Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, said the outbreak has basically ended in China. If we look at recorded cases, just 0.005% of China's 1.4 billion population, 80,000 people, have been infected with coronavirus.
And so when you see people being welded into their homes and women being shot in the head at checkpoints and all of this craziness, and the media 6 weeks ago was like, this is good to weld people in their homes. It's good to shoot women in the head at checkpoints. It's good that Russia and India and all these countries have said no flights from China. But then we do it, and the media says Trump's evil, America's bad, and China says so, and the UN does. And I said, oh my God. They want it to come here. They want it to incubate. They're going to blame Trump for a lack of response. They're going to tell you it's not a big deal. It's not communicable, but show you the hysteria so you get scared. You know the media is lying to you. So I've always told the media, if you ever wanted to hurt a candidate, endorse them. Well, it's the same thing. Come out and say it's no big deal 6 weeks ago, but then show the juxtaposed hysteria by the government taking place. People are going to get very unsettled by the mixed messages. And then as the deaths begin to mount, the hysteria begins to mount. And it started about 2 weeks ago as predicted. Bill Maher, CNN, MSNBC, all praising the virus, saying, oh, I hope it hurts the economy. It's a good price to pay. It's worth it. These are quotes. Incredible statements. And now it's just a steady drumbeat. And the left has fully embraced it and says it's going to destroy America, that they've always hated. And they've got big Reuters polls out last Friday that coronavirus beliefs split along party lines. Republicans believe it's not a big deal. Democrats believe it's the end of America because it's what they want. It's their ethos. So whether, again, the virus is super deadly or not, the hype is 100% real. Just like you fire a firearm off and it by the feet of a cow, and it gets a big herd of cows to get scared and they start running. And once a herd of cows starts running, it'll run through fences, it'll run across roads, it'll run over people, and they'll just run right off the edge of a cliff.